First of all, I am sure we all know how critical it is to build customer relationships as a fuel for growth. It really can lead to loyalty, sustained business, increased sales from additional cross-sell, upsell, and additional acquisition of customers through referrals or even positive word of mouth. But just like personal relationships, this doesn't happen overnight. And it takes relevant actions to cultivate and nurture those relationships. And I'm sure we've maybe all experienced too that if it's taken for granted or allowed to deteriorate, boy, they can be gone in a flash. And as marketers, we know that people's needs aren't static. You know, their needs, their behaviors, their expectations really shift over time. So building those strong customer relationships help you stay connected. And then you're at the ready to pivot when these shifts occur so that you can really nurture the relationship. Given the recent experience we probably all have had with rapidly changing needs, and some previous experience that I've had in other situations of rapid change, I wanted to share a few of my thoughts on how we can really respond to that opportunity in front of us to deepen customer relationships and better anticipate their future needs. So the first thought I have for you is that listening is the real foundation to your customers so that you can form some new hypotheses along the way. So a few thoughts on this. First, if you're going to rethink how you listen, one way may be to listen early and also think of new ways to listen. And if you're going to want to listen early, you're going to need to invest in it. So take a leap. Be brave. Don't wait for the dust to settle, as you might lose a very important opportunity to benchmark where your customers are right now. And just like in a relationship, don't keep asking the same questions over and over. I mean, how many times do you want to answer, how was your day? So unleash the strategic scientists in your organization and have them help you create new designs of experiments with creative questions to ask. Let me share an example. When the pandemic emerged, we augmented our current research with the syndicated research out there. There was definitely a lot of rich information. In some cases, a little more helpful if you needed to understand toilet paper consumption. But in a lot of cases, not quite as informative as we needed to identify needs and attitudes for financial services, both now and in the future. So we took a leap. We cast a wider net by developing a custom research program that allowed us to think about some and identify some widespread as well as some emerging shifts in those behaviors. When we cast this wider net of insights sources, that allowed us to really help create the art of the science in making connections across multiple data sets and have a very strong and solid hypothesis. You know, when the world is shifting so fast, perhaps so should your approach at listening to your customer. So on top of those consumer behavior shifts work that we did, we also invested in some other sources of insights ahead of the pandemic, particularly around measuring the state of our customer relationships. This enabled us to reveal insights on what really mattered most to customers, our customers, as NPS is a key loyalty metric to measure those end-to-end customer relationships, of course, based on their likelihood to recommend us. But it's important to note that that's not a one and done effort, right? It takes continual monitoring of the health of a relationship. Now, my next thought for you is to create a hypothesis. And don't be afraid to prove yourself wrong or even right. So, coming back to strategic scientists, in order to be an effective one, you need to be comfortable with developing new hypotheses by questioning the norms, and not being afraid to prove yourself wrong. So, because that's oftentimes, where the real learning takes place. For example, for us in getting to those real insights on emerging behaviors and expectation shifts, we had to start with a list of hypotheses on not only what those shifts could be right now, but also importantly, what could they be for the future? And then you have to ask the right questions. Really strong hypotheses give you this freedom to ask questions you never thought of asking before. But be prepared, when you're exploring those new areas, you have to expect the unexpected. Let go of hypotheses where you were wrong, and dig into the ones where you actually look like you might be correct. So I can give you a few examples of where our hypotheses appear to be correct. The first one is that we thought we would see a rising appreciation for holistic health. Despite COVID being a physical health crisis, the primary impact really has been on people's financial health. Which has them then feeling an impact on the other aspects of holistic health, such as social and mental. And so we've seen a greater connection between all of those aspects. The second one that appears to be correct is that engagement with your customers really matters. The insurance business can be a low engagement category. You might purchase life insurance, for example, and not hear from a company until you actually need to pay your premium. What we found was that customers not only value interactions, but especially those that feel more human. Customers perceive that when they have a contact or, someone they can pick up the phone and call, we had significantly better relationship scores and definitely a higher likelihood to recommend. But there's also been a few where we were proved wrong, or were rather surprised with the findings. Although we were expecting people to have some more fear and maybe even anxiety, during this time, we weren't expecting so much optimism, very high levels of optimism and hope. The other one was we really thought that there may be more willingness to trade privacy for safety and value. But we haven't seen a lot of evidence in this area yet. Now, the last thought in this area is democratizing insights. So once you have all these great insights from these hypotheses, they become like real news you can use. And there are a lot of people who use them. So earlier I was telling you about the behavior shifts research we did. We quickly moved to democratizing those insights. So, we tried some new things. We created a weekly customer roundup that went out to the organization and shared not only what our customers are doing or saying or feeling, but also sharing other reports worth reading or other competitive actions that we were seeing. And then we established a knowledge hub so that it could act both as a repository for these insights, so people could access them, but also as a community enabler so that people could share what they were seeing as well. And then we held internal webinars, and not only to share the insights that we were seeing, but also to host panels of people across the organization, our marketers, our business leaders, even our functional partners, so that everyone could share how are these insights being used to drive action and make real meaningful improvement for our customers. So let's pivot to understanding how your role could and maybe should change. As the world shifts, customer expectations and behaviors shift, maybe even at a greater pace and magnitude. And therefore, people could be more agnostic and more open on who and how their problems are solved. So, when that status quo is being shaken up, there's a real window there for consumers to be more open to new solutions, even new providers, or new approaches to solving those problems. This really gives us an opportunity to challenge the fundamentals of the relationship. As expectations shift, oftentimes so do the roles that organizations or brands or institutions can play. So use those new insights that you have to question everything, challenge your value proposition. If you're not filling those new needs and expectations, somebody else will. You should also use your purpose as a guide to imagine new roles you could play. I'll share another example. People right now seem to be focused on preparing themselves and their family for the here and the now. So there's this real flight to short term, and they don't often make the link between being prepared in the near term and protection in the long term. So in order to better deliver on our purpose, we saw a real need for increased awareness and education of those long-term solutions and pathways. Because, honestly, there's never been a time where this is more important, because customers now have higher feelings of uncertainty, most notably around health, financial stability, and sometimes even privacy, and they don't know where to turn. So we needed to be hyper aware that our actions, whether that's through product or interactions or communications, and their personal experience can all be purpose proof points for our customers. And again, since we can tend to be a low interaction category, those moments are really critical. One example is the launch of 360 Health in our Asia markets. There's this need to be relevant today and not just in 15 years from now, when they might need us. So 360 Health has health riders attached to life insurance products, and they have these marquee services that range from disease prevention or second opinion, hospital concierge services, or visiting nurse and hospice services. And considering that we don't do traditional healthcare in these markets, and that these health services are often not covered by others, it gives us a new role to play, to be relevant today and really differentiate. Another example is imagining new roles that we can play in creating conversations, sometimes about uncomfortable conversations, but they need to be had. So, for example, our US business, we sell insurance through employers during open enrollment. And this is a time when voluntary benefit options are also selected. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. However, sometimes these benefits are overlooked by us as employees because we don't fully understand where we have protection and where we don't, or where we might need it. Or perhaps we haven't had conversations with our loved ones and our families about these needs. So this was a real insight that it isn't always just a new life event that triggers needing to know more and to take action. But sometimes it's about having a conversation with someone like them or someone they trust to fully realize the need. So we created some new enrollment tools as conversational videos in real human language, for employee education. These were real conversations between people, between newlyweds, between friends, between children and their parents, all discussing, things they hadn't thought of before, and needs that they had for protection. And then they were so powerful and helpful that we use them in media to drive a broader awareness of those needs. Now, let's take a look at my last quick thought for you. And I noticed in the previous session, we were talking about this as well. So it's all about adapting quickly and prioritizing agility. So now you have all these great insights, and people will be thinking about new ideas, to adapt for the future. What we can do is really encourage people to develop those, find new ways to pressure test them, both internally and externally. What I have found is that being inclusive and inclusivity really drives innovation. But people need to be encouraged, and it's okay if it's not 100% successful. You learn something. I also believe that it's our responsibility to build a culture of athletes. Athletes who have depth of specific knowledge and capabilities, but also breadth of application. When the world is changing so rapidly, we need people who can also pivot and stretch just as rapidly. Earlier, I told you about my team delivering and then democratizing new customer behavior and relationship insights. Now, while our aim is to reveal those customer insights and develop customer strategies to build, deeper, long-lasting relationships, many times, in doing that can lead to projects that have really long lead times. We focus on readouts of data versus real news you can use, right? And the pandemic really gave us the opportunity to imagine a new role we could play within the organization. I like to call it that of a newsroom of strategists and scientists, and that now have content creator and publisher hats on, so that we can find new ways to deliver our insights. There's so much positive energy when you cultivate this kind of mindset and encourage movement towards that culture of real agility. So, in summary, my thoughts for you are to rethink and challenge how you listen to your customers by not only listening early, but often while forming hypotheses along the way. Be open to the new roles that you can play and how your role could and should change. And lastly, adapt quickly and prioritize agility. But coming back to the original question of how do we deepen customer relationships and better anticipate their needs? I think in the end, it's about us being willing to change just as much as our customers are, just like you would in a relationship. And thank you very much.
I love that. Thanks, Michelle. I'm not sure if David's supposed to chime in here or I'm just supposed to roll, but thank you for a lot of great wisdom and perspective. And I'm excited to have a quick conversation with you. That was just a great keynote, and though we have not known each other forever, I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in many, many ways. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Jack Bamberger. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Amobee, and as some of you may know, Amobee is a truly unique global media channel advertising platform. And what we do is we uniquely offer end-to-end campaign management across linear TV, connected TV, digital, as well as social, empowering advertisers to unify their audiences, optimize campaign performance, and most importantly, powerfully drive growth for brands and agencies. And just some of the small companies we work with in the industry are Molson Coors and Kraft Heinz, Toyota and Verizon, Constellation Brands, MasterCard, Nestle, who we just heard from, and more across the globe. And for those of you who have not worked with me in the past, I am both in a good way and in a bad way, okay about not being, I don't know how you feel about this, Michelle, not being in Las Vegas at the moment for CES. But I actually have to say
what a lot clearer than it might have been if I was in Las Vegas. But
yeah, no, ditto. Could not agree more. But I have to say, and it actually connected to what you were talking about actually a little bit. I actually miss the personal connections badly. And in fact, one of the things that I wrote down is you were talking about some of the content around the value of human interactions is everyone right now needs a virtual hug. And I think we can't underestimate the importance in your industry or in any industry of the two words, I care. I think that that's just really, really critical. So the whole idea of us grabbing dinner at CES or grabbing a cocktail, just being in person, I look forward to that soon. I really, really do. But that said, for now, Michelle and I are going to have a great conversation in a virtual experience, and we're going to jump into some of the things that Michelle talked about and unpack a little bit, not only about her perspective on what was just discussed about the customer experience and customer relationships, but I would also say we're going to talk a little bit about learnings across her career and how it all comes together in terms of what makes Michelle who she is as an extraordinary marketer as well. So I'm going to dive right in a little bit. So Michelle, thank you again. That was just a great keynote. And I said, I feel like we're kindred spirits. You spoke about listening in new ways, being responsive, a new kind of agility, which, as I said, really resonated with what we at Amobee have experienced during COVID as well. What's interesting is actually for years, I've also been a huge fan of creating an initiative that I call Voice of the Customer. And for me, it's just incredibly imperative to have an outside-in approach to drive strategy, to drive operations, to drive messaging, to drive growth. And you shared some great examples of what you and your team and colleagues have been able to do at MetLife in those areas, which I think, you know, are just awesome. Let's start with this question. What experiences in your past prepared you to be able to react in that fashion, or what trained your, what you were calling agility muscle, so to speak?
Yeah, well, you know, we would take up the whole time if I told you my whole past, because it's a long, winding one, right? But I'll start with maybe the thought of, I think you first need to have the desire to have agility, because that's not easy. You know, it's an easy thing to say, but I've found is it takes energy to do that. Yeah. Right? I mean, it isn't like getting up, punching the clock every day, doing the same thing. It's like, no, you're curious about what else is there. You're restless, you know, about learning new things. You're resilient because, you know, you really need energy to be okay with sometimes not succeeding and picking yourself back up and pivoting and trying something else. So I found that there's been a couple of things that have helped me, A, with that energy, but B, with the application. So and probably many of you may have done this as well, but, you know, I had the opportunity to be trained as a corporate athlete back in my day at P&G. And, you know, the whole premise around that is that it isn't really about time management, it's really about energy. And how do you create and sustain energy to be, you know, extraordinary at the few things that you want to be. but you have to have energy to go do that. And I find agility kind of the same way. It's like one of the key tenets for that. So in application, I feel like sometimes corporate athlete gave me the ability to have the energy, but then some of my experiences across my career really helped me apply it. So, even if I go back to my days at P&G, where I really learned to be a marketer, we had a lot of role transitions. And those were important, I think, in my development, because you had to learn how to have very fast ramp up curves and pivot and adjust to what are the expectations, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve, because sometimes your assignments were only 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't have time to be like, ramping up for 18 months and then you haven't delivered anything. I think also having the opportunity to transition to other companies and industries has been instrumental in my experience. Not only do you learn new languages, like everyone has their own dictionary of not just acronyms, but how they use real words to mean certain concepts. But you find new ways of approaching challenges. You find ways to rally organizations around new imperatives, for example. So I think role and company transitions has been a way to build that agility muscle. I think the other one is being in rapid change environments. One, like we're living with, here now with COVID. The other is, if you happen to have a brand or company crisis. So when I was at Samsung, Note 7 happened, super fun. And, being part to help lead that brand rebuild, it took a lot of agility, not just for me, but, trying to instill that in the organization, because you really needed a war room mindset. As you got in new data, you had to figure out how do you pivot and find new ways to connect with customers, especially the most loyal customers, because they could become even stronger advocates for you.
Yeah.
So I think those are a couple of key experiences that I would point to.
Very much so. I think what resonated the most with me that connects to similar thinking, just some language that I've been using across my career as well, because I think one of the things that when you talk about the muscles or, muscle agility, if you will, I think perspective, experience, to your point of having many role transitions just gives you those muscles over time, because you pull from your past, you learn from your present, and then you solve for your future. And a few lines that I use a lot are, how do I get smart fast? And to try and create a culture in the team that is focused on that always. I also like the idea of failing fast. Even I've only been at this job 8 months. We've launched a new product. We tried to launch another new product. We went into beta twice. It didn't work, but we learned a lot, and that's okay. Yeah. But I think, to your point, back to sort of perspective and those muscles, how do you live in a matrix as you learn and gather intelligence and actually make if-then decisions on a fluid basis and create a culture where, it's not just about the war room, but it's just the practice, if you will. Even though I agree with the war room model, very much so, but it becomes more of just your muscle memory of how you operate versus you actually have to have that sort of, but sometimes you need language, and that's okay to actually get there. So you live in that matrix of decision-making all the time.
And being comfortable, I think, of being in the gray. You don't know the right answer, right? But you're comfortable with being there. And that was really the example I was trying to share in the keynote of, during COVID, there was a lot of gray. like, everyone wanted to know, like, what do our customers want? What are they saying? What are they need? And we're like, and people wanted answers now and wanted insights now. They didn't want it next month in a readout form, And so, to your point, not even just a war room mindset, but more of a stand-up kind of mindset. My team went into action mode of, hey, we're going to meet 30 minutes a day and like come together and figure out what do we need to do to pivot, then go out and work, and then come back together. And what do we need to do to pivot? And just even that, I think created a kind of a connection amongst the team, but also like just drove energy into achieving something new. It's a new way to do it.
What I also applaud is that daily stand up, and having that energy. I think actually it connects two things that you talked about, which is how does energy come out of curiosity and how does curiosity drive energy? And it's really the two of those in combination that actually creates the volcano explosion of opportunity as a company, as a leader, as as a team, and more. And I know my 9-year-old son always talks about, Dad, where do you get all this energy? Like, he's just blown away by it. And I think it's honestly my curiosity. I am always about, it's maybe my journalism training, but it truly is about what else is out there? What can I learn? How does the puzzle come together? And more, that actually gives me that fuel.
Yeah, honestly, I think I have 2 kids, and I think that's one of the best lessons to teach them is, never stop being curious.
Well, I'm going to go a little backwards to go forwards just for a second, because you've had an amazing career. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that in terms of your career path and your journey in marketing. And you've had a lot of great experiences and mentors. You and I are both part of the Jim Stengel fan club from your P&G days. I don't know if he's listening in, but we'll text him the recording. And I can imagine, how thrilling that must have been, because I know how much he's meant to my life and what I've learned from him. And as I think we joked when we were having the pre-call, I swear to God, I'm going to eventually have Jim Stengel and the word purpose tattooed on my body one of these days. But given you've worked at...
We won't ask where.
Wait, what was that?
I said, we won't ask you where.
No, I don't even know. I have no tattoos, so I'll disclose that right off. So given you've worked at a lot of amazing companies like P&G to Kimberly-Clark to Samsung and now MetLife, what drew you to MetLife after a career in CPG and consumer electronics? Just curious.
Yeah. So I've always been drawn to companies that are very customer centric, right? And so, P&G, that was an easy one, back when I was a wee marketer. And, because the mantra at P&G was consumer is boss. And, that's how I was raised as a marketer. And I think for me, that still stands for me today. It definitely drives how I think about being successful and delivering for our customers. And every opportunity I had to join another company, whether it was Kimberly-Clark or Samsung and now MetLife, that's been at the core of a transformation they were trying to drive, or a real impact that they were trying to make. So I think that's the key reason. But also, kind of being a little bit restless myself, MetLife showed another opportunity to learn another industry. Mm-hmm. I don't have a background in financial services, definitely not an actuary. But, at the heart of it, the opportunity to be at a company and even within an industry that is helping people, sometimes perhaps through the most difficult times, but also about helping them create and think about protecting their futures. I just find that very noble, but also it's amazing to see the passion in our organization to really understand what does the customer need? What do they expect? How are they changing so that we can build these new solutions?
Yeah.
And so it's a great organization to be part of because of that, because the customer really is at the center.
And it's a wonderful story because you really have been able to come full circle. At least this is my perspective. You've been able to come full circle and really be a part of an organization that can truly, truly, truly shape someone's life for good. And that doesn't mean what you've done in the past does not have that ability, but it is just, it's a different level of human connection that is so deep and core to who they are. So I completely admire and get that fully. Let's talk a little bit about customer relationships. I'd love to get your thoughts or comments on your keynote. The topics that I really resonated with were, listening, to democratizing insights, to creating a hypothesis. I also wrote down the word courage, to your trusted conversation videos, to my favorite, which is having the courage to question everything. So I'd love for you to talk, just, if you don't mind, a little bit, how do you see customer relationships in the category you're now in the insurance industry different? And I might have given it away a little bit, different from the customer relationships in industries like CPG or consumer electronics. So let's talk about the differences and then let's pivot into the similarities.
Okay. Well, I think, one difference is that there are less touch points sometimes in financial services and insurance, and particularly insurance, because, you might have a touch point at purchase. You might have a touch point at, pay the premium or renew it, or maybe a life event. And that's when the customer might reach out to you, or in a very challenging time, right? And those are different touch points than you might have, with consumer electronics, definitely, or beauty, which I worked on a lot at P&G. But it seems like a lot of people think it's a difference, but actually it's a bit more similar. In a lot of those cases, at least for the businesses I've worked on, we're always one step removed from the end customer.
Yeah.
And so, right,
whether
you
it's
buy
a retailer or a reseller.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the same way for insurance. You might buy insurance through a bank or through an agent, et cetera. And so I think the one similar challenge that most companies have is having a real direct relationship with customers, right? In that ecosystem of all of those other players involved, because everyone has some competing, priorities. And so it is it's a challenge. I think it is a marketing challenge too, to think of new innovative ways of how do you create those touch points. They're your customer, but like, how do you actually have the ability to reach out and touch them? So, I think that, to me, those would be the two main differences, is that in CPG or consumer electronics, you have more interaction touch points, but the similarity being that, we could all strengthen that direct relationship somehow.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's pivot to agility and adapting, and a culture of athletes, or as you said, who can pivot and stretch rapidly. I need to do that more as a person. I think I do that decently as a leader in my job, but I understand that completely. I've found the pandemic has required so many more of these muscles than ever before. I'm curious what your perspective is in terms of how the pandemic has changed your team's view on their role, how they've needed to do things differently in terms of what you were talking around, agility. Are there any, nuggets of things that you find that would be great learning for the team, or even conversations maybe with some of your team members on that topic that have gotten them to see the moment and the future differently than perhaps in the past as a leader?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple lessons there, and, to be totally honest, trying to figure out like, how do we sustain that momentum that we have, I mean, especially as no one's come back anytime soon. So you got to keep the energy going, not only to sustain it, but to, take what's really working and keep doing that. I think there were, for me and my personal team, I think there were a couple of key enablers. One was the ability to connect over, video, I think has created stronger relationships within the team and stronger trust, because you can't phone it in anymore. Right? Like you could be like, at home working from home, but you had it on mute and no one could see what you were doing. So now everyone's engaged. Okay. The bad side of that was everyone's engaged all the time. So our work hours have gotten a lot longer. So I worry about burnout a little bit, but so one of the things that I wanted to make sure was that we didn't make everyone have FOMO about the work we were doing. It's not possible to have everyone on everything. And so we really divided the work up into some real succinct work streams and put different people, not even from the same team, frankly, but combined talent to say, you guys are going to be solely focused on working on this. I know you want to work on this other project. I promise we'll bring people back together, but for your sanity, like I don't want you on the phone, on the screen 18 hours a day. Like, so focus on this. And you know what? They delivered in spades. I mean, and the value that they feel for their work has so increased that, I think that was a good move. It may not be a way that we operate ongoing, but for now, I mean, it's really helped. And then as the leader, like you take the hit on being the one that's stretched across all of those things and help create the connection points. Like you take that hit to, really enable your team to really focus.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's my job to do it, is help create the glue. And let them deliver greatness, in their work stream. So I think that's one big change in learning. I'm trying to think if there's another big one. I think I already talked about the other one, which is like, kind of put some agile principles in place of, daily stand-ups, shorter meetings, being quick, having shared drives, all those kinds of things have really increased our efficiency.
Yeah, no, you need more operational fitness in this time. As speaking of athletes, ironically, in an interesting way. But I agree with you. I know you used to live in Singapore. My boss lives in Singapore. I don't have beginnings, middles, or ends to my day. Many days.
Yes.
Number one, I've also, interestingly enough, joined this company during COVID. So I have a team across the globe that's, quite sizable. I've met almost none of them, unless I had a prior life.
In person, you mean?
Yeah, I've not met any of them in person, but I agree with you. Trust, stability, I would say authenticity, being human are just critical. And to your point, because you talked about it, listening is also equally important, not just from a consumer, and customer relationship standpoint, but as a leader as well. It's just critical, or else I truly believe you fail. You just absolutely have to do that. Okay, I'm gonna go back in another place. I don't know how much time we have. Are we supposed to go till the top of the hour, or?
I think so. I'm not sure.
I think so. Okay.
David will come in and cut us
They'll
off.
come
I'm
in and
sure.
tell us. I have one other question about this topic, and actually, I'll pivot to another place. I love the fact that your title includes the words marketing sciences. And
Yeah.
I think that's a very cool, hot, interesting discipline that is absolutely right for what is needed now in a very unpredictable world, in terms of everything from how people are buying or shopping or doing when they leave their home or not. What are the triggers in terms of what they're doing in terms of purchase decision or any kind of decision? You know, I know we had Nestle on earlier and they were talking about flexitarian. My problem is ice creamitarian, because in COVID, that's all I've been doing. But it's all about the insights and the science. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what your path has been like as a marketing executive in the specific area of marketing science as a focus, and where that is going, and what that drove in terms of you being focused on that in this role. If you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Love it. I love that topic too, Jack. Actually, way back when, even when I was in Singapore, I was the regional CMO over there at Kimberly-Clark, and I was struck by a presentation we went to where they were hypothesizing that, or forecasting that, chief marketing officer would eventually need to become chief marketing scientist. And I thought, well, that's a really cool idea, because it really is taking all of these insights and understanding understanding the customer, but it takes data, it takes hypotheses, it takes all these things, from disparate sets. I love that thought. And so, marketing sciences is one part of my title, marketing strategy is the other. And I really think it's the combination of those two. They used to be two separate organizations. It was those two things coming together that allow us to be action, deep human and customer insights, to enable those better decisions. And the one thing before David cuts us off is, is I think one of the career path, I took like kind of a winding curve to get where I am. I think that's great personally, because it's been very well-rounded, but I think, starting as an engineer, then turned marketer, actually helped build some robust problem-solving skills as a great foundation, and thinking about hypotheses that have really proved valuable across my career. And the second piece is having that ability, going back to the role transition, having the ability or opportunity to be in the shoes of different aspects of marketing end to end, whether that was designing new products, designing go-to-market plans, shopper marketing, running and being part of an agency. All of those things have helped me bring a more well-rounded approach to thinking about what is it that we really need to learn, and then set a great strategy and action plan to do that. And so I feel like that's what marketing sciences really entails, is it's not doing research and reading it out. It's really strategically thinking about what do we need to learn and helping people connect the dots.
Amen. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Brand Innovators. And David, I guess we turn it over to you from here.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jack. I always, in the role of MC, I love hosting these events. I hate that half the role is cutting everybody off, right? Like, I don't want to cut you guys off. I love hearing from you. This is what we do. And like I always say, we'll have you back again soon. There's always so many great things to talk about. But really, Michelle, thank you. It's always such a pleasure. Jack, phenomenal job, leading that discussion. So thank you both. Again, the audience, you can't hear them, but I'll give you the virtual round of applause. So thank you both for joining us, and like I've been saying, kicking us our community off on the best way possible, just helping set the tone for the entire year, right? Because that's what this is all about now, just kind of getting our heads straight as we go into